My name's Rebecca Lowry. I'm an associate curator here at MoCA, and I'm happy to welcome you to tonight's program, Pioneer Works, Perspectives on a Changing World. This event is part of our ongoing environmental programming series, which is guided by the work of MoCA's Environmental Council and made possible by Nora McNeely Hurley and the Manitou Fund. The Environmental Council, which is the first of its kind among major American art museums, focuses this museum on climate, conservation, and environmental justice, working toward essential future-minded undertakings as we all race together against climate disaster. At the core of a project like the Environmental Council is a union between optimism and effort. Tonight's panel brings together three individuals: an artist, an environmentalist, and a physicist, for a discussion on the global impact of human-made climate change and the possibility of combining optimism and effort to build a sustainable and equitable future through culture, activism, and education. Tonight's panel is moderated by Adrianne Ramsey, an independent curator, writer, and arts editor who is currently an MA candidate in curatorial practices at USC. Adrianne has organized exhibitions for Root Division, Berkeley Arts Center, and USC Rothschild Galleries, and is the founder and editor-in-chief of Girls Magazine, an online publication that interviews femme-identifying artists, art professionals, curators, and writers about art and politics. She is also director of communications of Art into Acres, a nonprofit environmental art and land conservation initiative. Without further ado, then, I'd like to welcome Adrianne to the podium.
Hi, everyone. Hi. So thank you so much, Rebecca, for that lovely intro. First, I would like to thank Joanna Burden, the Maurice Marciano Director of MoCA, and Haley Mellon, founder of Art into Acres and co-founder of MoCA's Environmental Council, for inviting me to moderate this panel. It is a great honor to be a part of MoCA's environmental programming series, and I would also like to thank Pioneer Works and Dustin Yellin for organizing this panel. I believe that we are in for a great lecture and discussion. Tonight we will hear from Dustin Yellin, David Day Rothschild, and Janna Levin for a discussion on the global impact of human-made climate change and the possibility of building a sustainable and equitable future through culture, activism, and education. I am excited to welcome them. They will speak about why climate change is the most pressing issue of our time, how education innovation can unlock solutions to political inertia, and how the actions we take today can forestall the direct impact of the looming crisis. So over 50 years ago, the ethos of environmentalism was about saving the planet from nuclear war. It was an abstract concept, and the current framing of environmental conversations is much more concrete. Environmental justice is intersected with so many issues: racial and gender justice, immigration, food and economic security, and more. We as a society are facing several climate-related problems right now. It can be overwhelming when one realizes how much global warming shapes our lives, but also how many touch points at which we can enact changes to potentially make a difference. Our access to food, safe and comfortable shelter, physical health, clean water, and rising sea levels show that climate change, our access to food, safe and comfortable, shelter, physical health, clean water, and other necessities are all impacted by the increasing drought, more violent fire seasons, and rising sea levels. So the ongoing pandemic has also highlighted opportunity disparities relating to public health in the global economy, social isolation, mask wearing, distance learning, and access to testing, vaccinations, and medical care. Over the last decade, climate scientists have unanimously reported that we are in an age of unprecedented loss of biodiversity, land and soil degradation, increased carbon emissions, air pollution, the oceans, deforestation, and water scarcity. These same reports urge immediate action to avoid devastating consequences. Environmental history shows us how we got here, but there are significant barriers to fully grasping the magnitude of our current climate crisis and making necessary changes for a viable future. This is not the time for complacency. So each of the panelists will give an individual presentation about their own practices and philosophies about the pertinent topic of climate change. After each panelist has spoken, I will moderate our conversation with questions I will pose to each participant. They are welcome to ask each other follow-up questions, and then we will go into audience questions. So this panel will also be recorded and posted onto MoCA's website. So I would like to introduce Dustin Yellin, who is an artist who balances a sculptural practice that visualizes the catastrophic impact of anthropocene with a social practice to build community through accessible transdisciplinary education and engagement as a catalyst to provoke social change. He is the founder and director of Pioneer Works, and his work has been exhibited at numerous venues, including the Brooklyn Museum, SCAD Museum of Art, the Kennedy Center, and the Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts.
Hello. I'm going to do this real fast, and I'm not going to talk funny, because I do that. So I usually have a lot of slides, and I still do. That sounded like, okay, let's see, let's try this. I ask this question all the time, so you guys can ask yourselves about fires and floods and overpopulation and contamination and viruses, man-made and otherwise, and equity, structural racism, artificial intelligence, and of course the bomb, something we still must think about because there's too many of them. So we do this. I'm not going to read what it says because that feels weird. We need to do that. All right, anybody been there? I'm going to do this real fast. Cool, a couple people. Yeah, I dig it. It inspired me to make some weird shit. So I draw on layers of glass. I make these weird archives of human consciousness trapped in these 3,000-pound microscope slides. I make drawings and collages on these layers of glass. They're called psychogeographies. It's like I smushed up your brains and I stick it in some glass so you can see it. This is at the Lincoln Center and the Kennedy Center. Here's a cool one where, you know, the idea of the Theia hypothesis, where the moon was part of the Earth. The moon, we are the Earth. The moon comes out of our stomach and becomes our head, right? So we all have moon heads. I'll go real fast. I think a lot about Leviathan, the bodies, the many bodies is the one body, right? You all think about that, I hope. Certainly in these dark, dark times, we need to think about it more. This is a weird thing with a moon head coming out of the 1919 solar eclipse that helped prove general relativity. Right down there, you see that, and life goes from 2 dimensions into 3 dimensions. There's a battery-operated frog licking a black hole. You all like Carl Sagan? Yeah. All right. This is a council of pigeon astronauts looking into a black hole. This will be in Canada soon. I like this one. This is the politics of eternity. On the left side is the future, on the right side is the past. In the future, we're building a brave new world, a futuristic city, a rocket, a hyperloop, and a particle accelerator. The particle accelerator is reflected by a cave of minerals in the past, and the past is inhabited by animal-headed humans that are extracting the minerals and carrying them through the mountain to build a totemic antenna to the gods, which is the same scale as the rocket. And everything is mirrored. Where the tree is on the left, the tree is on the right. Where the satellite's by the moon, you got the dinosaurs by the sun. You got 2 oceans falling into a 3rd ocean. And you got Mars, the god of war, and a supertanker sinking as an allegory to the Ark with animals coming out. This is called the politics of eternity. Much better in person. You ever come to New York, you come visit. Well, maybe we'll put it upstairs. All right. I'll go fast. This shit's better in real life. So I kind of have like a descriptive and prescriptive. I'm kind of like a performance artist. My sculptures are like my props in a performance to make a public project. And that shit is bad right now. There's the public project. Anybody been there? All right, cool. It's a box with a lot of people in it. A recording studio and a ceramic studio and weird light shows and telescopes and concerts. Weird shit, it's all free. We're basically, our operating system, the way we govern, the way we educate, has not really been updated since we created this thing called the internet, or the Industrial Revolution, or artificial intelligence. That's not good. Oh, and that thing. You all got one, I hope? Each and every one of you. Anybody read The Sorrows of Young Werther? Yeah? Put a band on their arm. Oh yeah, I'll end with this. That's a boat. It moves fossil fuels around. It is a technology that scaled fossil fuels globally. It's a rather large ship. I've been working for a long time to lift one up. And this thing, I don't know how to make the video go, but can you imagine go, like Fitzcarraldo, pick up the boat, and hello, there it goes. And I'll make it safe for about 1.5 million people a year to pay to go up to the bridge, and we're going to take the money from them, and we're going to give it to the land. I'm going to put some solar panels on it. All right, let's see. Oh yeah, I like this. Anybody here do psychedelics? All right, me too. So I ask myself this all the time. Anybody seen this? Yeah, let's make some subway systems with slime mold. And what do those dendrite structures look like? Let's see. So, this is really how I feel. We might have all the tools in the world, but if you all can't get together and to get along, and I mean you like China and the United States and India and the rest of y'all, we're fucked. But thankfully, we don't dream alone. This whole thing is malleable. Anybody here like Joseph Beuys? Anybody know who that is? All right, good. And the whole point is it's malleable. The whole thing is a hallucination, right? The whole thing is invented. So we can invent ourselves out of here and save all the octopuses, or we can die. All right, who's next?
Thank you, Dustin. That was lovely. Loves it. All right. So I'm going to, I'm so sorry. I'm going to introduce David Day Rothschild, who is an ecologist and activist whose global exploration and adventuring has brought widespread attention and innovative solutions to urgent environmental issues. In 2006, David founded the Voice for Nature Foundation, an organization that uses exploration, adventure, and storytelling to give nature a voice. He uses innovative storytelling to inspire a movement about how we can all live more sustainably.
Brilliant. Thanks. So I basically spent the last 20 years pretty much just being a card-carrying nature lover. People often love to put labels on those things and say, well, what do? You're an environmentalist, and it sounds very lofty. And everyone says, how do you become an environmentalist? And I say, I've never not met an environmentalist. In other words, I've never met anybody who doesn't love nature. And we're sitting, as we've just heard, at this inflection point where our ability to live on this planet depends upon our relationship with nature. Nature is ultimately the remedy to everything that we face. It holds 4.5 billion years of locked-in innovation. It has answers to questions that haven't even been asked. The way we study nature, unfortunately, is through this very human-centric lens where we are the dominant species, one of many other species on the planet, where we look at it as a system that's outside of us. So for me, my relationship or my work in a sort of nutshell is really looking at this human-nature gap that is becoming ever wider. ever since the start of the sort of first agricultural revolution, when we realized we went from being hunter-gatherers and nomadic and moving to what we needed, and stopped and made things that we need move to us. We started to put roots in, and then we started to manipulate those systems, and we were just too good at it, you know? And we continue to manipulate those systems. And those systems really are just ultimately manipulating ourselves. It's to mirror back onto ourselves when we look at ourselves. And sometimes I really think that the biggest problem that we face is that we're just not comfortable with looking at ourselves and our imperfections. And that is the biggest challenge we face. The crisis we're facing is a crisis of identity, who we are. You know, my dad died last night, and I was talking about it in the car on the way here. And I knew it was going to happen. You know, he was 91 years old. So that happens. Like, there's a constant, right, in this room. We're all going to die. But there's a part of our brain that's very animalistic that just blocks that out. Even when I say it now, you're going to die. We all go, no, not me. That's it next to me. He's dying first, not me. She's going to die, not me. It's a part of our brain. And I knew he was going to die. But you think, no, it's not going to happen. Live forever. We're all going to do it. The only variable is when, right? And how. That's the only variable. Everything else is the same. And that is our relationship with nature. We have because we cannot accept our own mortality, and we cannot accept that we are going to die, we cannot accept the crisis we're going to face, and that's why we're losing. We cannot accept it. We're living with an outdated brain model. It's that simple, right? And that's why we do silly things the whole time, like this, add a bit of levity back into the room. This is a real photograph in Hong Kong. The sky is so polluted that you cannot see the skyline. So rather than deal with the consequences, what we do is we print out a massive poster of what it does look like if we manage to solve this problem, and then we take a photograph in front of it. And we may all think, well, that's not me, that's ridiculous. But we talk about the anthropocene. The biggest problem we face is we are in the distractor scene. We all have our heads down looking at images of nature. The number one thing we see on Instagram is people enjoying nature because we love it. I've never met anybody who's like, that fucking dolphin deserved it. It was so smug. I'm so happy he got caught up in the net. That fucking tree deserved to be chopped up and made into some furniture. No one's like that. We love trees. But we are nature, right? And that is the relationship gap that we are missing. And while we're distracted, we're doing this. We're literally destroying our ability to live. And when you look at the interconnected relationship between humans and nature, everything we do to nature is mimicked exactly back to us. Our bodies are made of those systems. So when we raise those forests, which are our lungs of the planet, we lose our ability. We see a rise in asthmas and breathing disorders, and we see a rise in viruses. We see that. When we denature our soil for massive agribusiness, we see gut disorders, irritable bowel, Crohn's disease, so on and so on. When we slow down our oceans, the conveyor belts in our oceans that we're doing, and we take all the nutrients out of our oceans and we denature them, we slow them down, we see the same thing. That's our cardiovascular system. That's what moves, energy around our planet. That's what we see replicated in our body with hypertension, hyper disorders, so on and so on. So as we are at war with nature, really, we're just at war with ourselves. That is it. It's just mimicked back on us. Everything we are doing to nature is effectively doing it to ourselves. And that human nature gap is getting wider. And why should we care? Well, because, I haven't moved through slides. Sorry, that was the slide I was meant to show you about raised. And because we share this planet with all these other species. When we talk about a multidisciplinary approach, there's nothing more multidisciplinary than nature, right? It's the ultimate multidisciplinary system. Everything is reliant on everything, each other. The sloth here, which for so long has been studied, and no one, I love this. Like, if you ask any scientist generally about why animals do things and, around their habitats, we just don't know still. We just don't know. We've rushed to name a lot of stuff. I know, hurry up, but, and I just love this story, right? This is this incredible story, this sloth, this really slow-moving thing that hangs in the tree, but it would go down to the bottom of the tree to poop, and no one could figure out why was it going to the bottom of the tree to poop. But that's insane. Just poop out of the tree, right? Like, why go down to the bottom? You're super slow moving, you've got no energy. Like, that seems like a lot of effort just for a poop when you can just do it from the tree. And finally, they realized that the green stuff in their fur was actually a microbiome full of incredible life forms. And when it goes down to the bottom of the tree, the larvae in its fur is basically, there's moths rather in its fur, living inside of its fur. They drop the larvae into the poop. And that's how the cycle is, this interdisciplinary relationship between poop and moths to larvae that create this microbiome in its fur that then can be harvested to find cells and find, Chagas disease and all these other things, 50% reduction in breast cancer, hiding in this guy's, or this sloth's hair. But because we're distracted, because we don't think about it as a problem, because we think of nature as a hobby, it's something we can turn on or turn off. Would you like the room with the ocean view? Yeah, sure, I'll pay more for that, but I won't go for a swim. We're losing this intelligence. So when it comes to solving this problem, we have to get back into our hearts and we have to look at ourselves, look at our own mortality, figure out how to apply that to the work that we do. I think about it through these lenses. It's passion, purpose, and play. And those are the three motivators that we need to get into, each of us, whatever it is that you do. But whatever it is that you're doing, nothing is more important than tackling this human nature gap. We got to close that gap. Otherwise, we won't be around, and that's it. It's that simple. We're losing. And so we can talk more about it, but now to black holes.
Thank you, David, very much for speaking, and thank you for being here. Thank you very much. The last panelist that I'm going to introduce is Janna Levin, who is a theoretical astrophysicist who considers life and environments on exoplanets, and how the climate crisis impacts not only our planet, but the universe around it. She's also Director of Sciences at Pioneer Works, Editor-in-Chief of the magazine Pioneer Works Broadcast, and author, and Claire Tao Professor of Physics and Astronomy at Barnard College of Columbia University.
Thank you so much. I'm kind of an interloper here. Oh, is this Mercury? I'm a bit of an interloper here because I really am not a climatologist. I really am an astrophysicist, and so I kind of want to take a very distant perspective and remind us that we're part of this crazy experiment that nature is doing. Nature is constantly experimenting. If we look even just at the planets in our solar system, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, poor demoted Pluto, and we even have some moons like Io that are effectively like planets. If we look at that, the range of ecosystems is staggering even just in our own solar system. We have sulfuric acid rains. We have planets with no magnetic fields to protect them from DNA ruinous rays coming from space. And all of this just in our backyard. And I just kind of want to remind everybody that we are just part of that experiment in this cauldron of close encounters and accidental happenings. We're just a fluke as well. On one of these planets in our solar system, singular-celled organisms waffled, namely on our planet, for billions of years. There was no guarantee that it would break through this is not a singular-celled organism, obviously, but just weird things that exist out there. There was no guarantee that we would ever break through being single-celled organisms. That's a very successful run, 1 billion years, right? And we've only been around for a few 100,000. We're not doing so well. The possibly singular event that caused two organisms to merge in a way that effectively overcame an energetic barrier to become multicellular was possibly just a fluke, right? And most cases in which that happened, the organisms both died. But in possibly a single instance, it became energetically viable. And then there was a sudden radiation of multicellularity. So I just want to remind us of how precious and not at all guaranteed it is that life overcame those barriers here. And I think that what we're looking at when we see the range of bizarre organisms out there is a reminder that nature is just experimenting. Trial and error, what succeeds, what fails under pressure. And many times in the history of the Earth has wiped out species. And when I think about us destroying the planet, I think that that's a wrong phrasing. We're the ones who are so fragile and delicate that we can't tolerate a couple of degrees change in the environment and the weather system. We're not destroying the planet. We're provoking the planet to destroy us. Shake us off and start again with another experiment. And I think we have to really look at that hard. We're not destroying the planet. We will take down maybe a third of the species with us, but we're really, and you said this, David, destroying ourselves. There is no other hospitable form in our solar system. And when we look out there, we look and we see organisms like jellyfish, which have existed successfully for hundreds of millions of years. And there is something also that you both made reference to, and that is our use of tools and the desire to manipulate our environment. That might guarantee our unsuccessfulness as a species, that creatures who live happily in the planet that formed them so perfectly, they have the possibility of real longevity that we don't have, we don't seem to possess. Because even if we do survive, we are certainly in a precarious place. There's no question about that. So to bring this out as far as possible, you're about to look at a digital atlas of just our neighborhood. I want to remind you that not only is there our solar system, but only in the past 20 years or so, we've realized that of the hundreds of billions of stars in the Milky Way galaxy, most of them have multiple planets. That means that there's trillions of planets in the Milky Way galaxy, and there are more planets than there are stars in the universe. There are hundreds of billions of galaxies in the observable universe, with their hundreds of billions of stars, and their trillions of planets. And you might think that the calculus sounds simple, that we are not alone, that there must be, you can see here the little blue circles are just known planetary systems in our backyard, just right in our backyard. You might think that the question, are we alone, is easily answerable just by these large numbers. But when you begin to realize that a species that does use tools and aggressively controls our environment and can no longer survive naturally in the ecosystem that designed it so beautifully, that it might be that we are a telling lesson that we are alone, right? And that is not an answerable question to us yet, even though we know that there are trillions of planets. We don't have a lot of suggestive evidence that creatures like us are successful. And yet, to give it the other angle, we are also the only species on this planet that can make an incredibly complex instrument, that can put it into orbit around the sun, that can reflect on the reality that we are a blip in a 14-billion-year-old cosmos. And the fact is that it is absolutely humanly possible for us to redirect the path that we're on. It is absolutely humanly possible. The things, the ingenuity that we have shown, even in some of these international scientific experiments, proves that we are capable of coming together and solving unbelievable problems. So this is a question of will, and solely a question of will and commitment. And I also, just to conclude a little differently than I intended, to respond to something David said, it is, of course, haunting and provokes us to reflect on our own mortality, which we all know is inevitable, and it makes us think about purpose and meaning and what we're doing in the world, it is quite another thing to reflect on the mortality of our entire species. And I think that's why we've come together to talk about this particular topic. Thank you.
Okay. So first question that I wanted to ask is, so how do each of you attempt to understand how the past, present, and future collide in places and beings that exist at the intersections between human activity and the natural world? The loaded question.
I'm still word processing.
Yeah. Is it all right to repeat the question?
No, of course. So, how do each of you attempt to understand how the past, present, and future collide in places and beings that exist at the intersections between human activity and the natural world?
Phone a friend?
Oh yeah, you need to ask a friend.
Yeah. I mean, I'm happy to jump into that. I think, obviously, you know, in the most basic way for me, it's like looking from where you have to understand where we've been to understand where we need to go. I mean, that's just like the most obvious thing. I mean, to pick up what you were just saying, it's that idea of like, for the future, like one of the things that separates us from all other species is not just our imagination, right, and our creativity. At least is what we know, right, because we don't know, because we don't bother to learn the language of nature, right? So we'll go to another country and we'll do our best to communicate with other cultures through language, but it's funny that we go into nature and we don't learn to speak redwood or turtle or octopus or whale, right? Think about that, you know, that image of that, you know, that incredible jellyfish that has, you know, 600 million years of evolution, but we don't understand what it's saying. Why wouldn't we want to know what it's saying? Because it's got all the information about where we've been, and is probably holding on to information about where we're going just through the nature of how it's having to evolve. And if you've seen anything about our oceans, it's now more full of jellyfish than ever before. So clearly they're figuring out how to survive when everything else is dying.
It's got one battery. Do you think it's dying?
Oh, it's back on. Yeah, it's definitely working. So I feel like there's this very odd thing that happens with our brain in terms of like this, which separates us from other species, is this power of foresight, and we don't use it. Again, there is this very odd thing, right? Like, and I think ultimately, my humble opinion, a lot of this just comes back to fear, right? So a lot of the foresight narrative was predominantly in a very short period of time. I mean, 4.5 billion years, 2.5 billion years since an oxygenation event that allows us to breathe. Like, think about that. We're still the recipients of an oxygenation event 2.5 billion years ago. That's pretty cool. And we're ruining it so quickly. But you think about, you think about this power of foresight and fear, but the narrative, obviously, with the power of foresight, the thing is often it's been through the lens predominantly of religion, right? The fear of the unknown. And that's the thing that strikes me the most, is this fear of, like, you know, this idea that at some point there's an end, and if you're good, you go somewhere nice, and if you're bad, you go somewhere bad, right? And that's like being a big marker in our brains. And through that narrative as well, was the world was created just for us. And so I start thinking about that narrative and about how do we remove that fear piece, because actually, funnily enough, we can predict the future better than anyone. In any thread that I've ever seen, the future's been predicted perfectly by the scientists in climate. Perfectly. In fact, maybe a little less perfectly, that's happening faster. But I still think that the narrative is still fear, right? It's very binary, the way we present it. It's like, we do good, we'll survive, and everyone's going to be happy and good, right? We look at it like in this like movie lens. We've got this brain, but then everything inside of me goes, can't be that bad, can it? Like, I read this, like, it could be that bad? You know, our brain isn't like geared. So I think there's this kind of struggle between where we've been and understanding how that's affected to where we are today. But I think for me, it's so much more about the future, right? And the future being, we've got to remove these fear barriers. We've got to start looking at our sort of outdated brain and starting to say, actually, there can be prosperity, there can be hope. I am hopeful. I mean, I'm definitely hopeful. I'm definitely an optimistic pessimist. And I think that there is possibility. But I think we've got to get out of this fear part, this binary like ABC, because we are unlocking a series of Pandora's boxes that have interdependencies that we're out of control of. We can't just flip a switch. So I know that's a bit of a, maybe not answering you exactly on the sort of the timeline of humanity's impact and where we're at, but I definitely think we have this extraordinary gift of foresight. So much of that has been blurred and manipulated. We need to really use that to unlock our ingenuity and our innovation. And innovation is ultimately creative problem solving. And that's what we need to do as we move forward. So look at where we've been to figure out where we need to go. Sort of thing.
Can I try just sort of a weird... I think one of the things that amazes me is how unbelievably disconnected we are from nature. I find it wild. And I live up in a building in New York City above a cement street, and cars drive by. It's not as though I'm different. Very few animals can't live outside. It is so weird. We absolutely would die exposed to the elements. Like, that is fascinating to me. And I think that is extremely different about human beings than about other animals. So I don't know how that answers your question. It doesn't answer your question. I'm just also sharing in the marvel that on the boundary of the natural and the human is something that, if we were to expire, I find it kind of fascinating imagining like all these buildings left, all these airplanes, tankers, oil tankers, and boats will all just be left behind, and they will become overrun with vegetation and animals. It's strange.
Yeah, I mean, nature is resilient, not to jump in, but it is, and it comes back. And I think if anything about... like,
the planet will be fine.
The planet's fine. And I think you're right about that observation. We spend on average, we spend less than an hour outside every day. Think about that, on average. Like,
Outside?
Outside. And most people are spending 7 hours or more a day on a mobile device, looking at a screen, of which 40% of those images are nature. In some way, shape or form. #1 television show is like Blue Planet and Ambra. It beats Dancing on Ice. Literally in the UK, it's like 17 million. Everyone's like, oh, nature. It's nature porn. We love it when we can be voyeurs of nature and we can view it from the outside. And then if we do go into nature, we put on these crinkly, like man-made synthetic fiber suits in the most obnoxious colors, and we say, I bagged the mountain, bro. I fucking dominated nature. Yeah! And then we make a Netflix documentary and goes, that's cool, that guy fucked up the mountain, bro. Have you seen him? He's awesome. No, he's dead now. Do you know what I mean? Because nature always wins. And that's, you know what I mean? Like Grizzly Man, he got eaten by the bear. He fucking deserved it. You know what I mean? Like, if you're going to take MDMA or whatever he's doing and think you can lick a bear, yeah, it's going to eat you. But that is how, like, that's what we do, right? Like Shark Week became Shark Month, it's like when sharks attack. But I mean, like literally, we love nature when it like bites us, stings us, you know what I mean? Because it sits inside our evolutionary markers. Like we're more afraid of the darkness and camping in the woods than we are losing the woods. We're more afraid of being eaten by a shark than we are losing the species. And why should we care about losing the species of shark? Because we're like, that fucker's going to eat me. I don't care about that thing, right? It's an evolutionary fear. But if you look at the patterning on shark skin, it has a pattern that bacteria does not like to grow on because it's figured out how to do that through billions of, millions of years of evolution, hundreds of millions, 400 millions of evolution to figure out that if I pattern my skin in a certain way, not only was it, help me swim more efficiently, but also bacteria doesn't like that pattern. So why is that important? I can take that pattern, I can take it, and I can put it onto high-touch surfaces like this microphone or a credit card, and all of a sudden a shark that was meant to be something that's going to eat me is something that could potentially save me from the next more scary thing than a virus is a bacterial infection, right? That's the thing that's bubbling away now, just to be a Debbie Downer even more, is bacterial infection is going to be way worse, way, way worse. And so we need to look to nature for those answers. Anyway.
I don't know how to follow that. Yeah. I mean, I'll just dovetail into that and say that we don't have enough relationship with dovetails, with birds. We don't talk to animals. We are preoccupied with artificial intelligence instead of natural intelligence. So I like this idea of natural intelligence instead of artificial intelligence. If we can't get our natural intelligence together, how on earth are we going to use artificial intelligence to further a more productive and just society? And this is, you know, I think to both of your points, we are divorced from natural systems. And that thing is gonna destroy us. We are in the middle, maybe not the middle, we're at the very beginning of a silicon-based mutation. All of us in this room here. We are mutating, literally using our natural systems differently than we did 100 years ago. We are completely augmented. And now these motherfuckers want to put it in our heads, right? And how many of you here heard about the metaverse? You want to live there? Why on earth is that the thing?
I get it. I actually get it.
You get it? You want to go there?
I get it. I get it because it's like, I don't have to sleep. I can be who I want to be. I'm not judged. I can be who the fuck I want to be. And that's basically what we're all craving. That's simple. So it's playing into a very simple premise that we all want to be seen. And so the thing that we're missing, we're not seeing, is other species. And the thing that we're not recognizing is that when we damage those other species, we're damaging ourselves. But like, we all feel gross sometimes. We all feel happy sometimes. But if I can be consistently happy, then I can create an identity that someone else can be like, oh, that's cool. So I get it. I get it because it's, why do we want to go to space? Same shit. We fuck up what we've got in front of us, and then we run away and we blame someone else. And we're just repeating that system. And so the metaverse is just another parallel place where I can be perfect. I don't have to go on a diet. I don't have to sleep. I can look how I want to look. I can hide. I can, you know what I mean? And so, and what's sad about it is that they're the only end game for it, right, is it's another tool in our consumption addiction. And that is the basis of why we've got to get to the root of these things, right? Is that we're addicted to consuming. We love it. I do. Fuck, I get my phone out and I bought shit and it turns up at my house now. I don't even know. I'm like, did I buy something from Amazon? Like, I got 3 boxes. How did that happen? What did I buy? Right? It probably bought it for me. And so, we're so addicted to consuming because it makes us feel good because we're addicted to stuff. And that's primal. It goes right back to being hunter-gatherers. It goes back to that thing of survival, right? It goes back to that primal need. If I have more, right? It's the same with what we do. You look at it's like we live in a greed-guilt culture. So we're never going to get over that. I can say that because I'm a byproduct of that privilege. Right? Why do I get to think and sit here like, look at us all. We're so privileged that we can sit and sip. We get to choose. I have fizzy water. You have plain. No, I don't even know. I have one of each. But that's how privileged we are. We get to choose what kind of water we get to drink. So of course we should have an opportunity to think bigger than ourselves. But we're literally, I think we're sitting on this precipice for so many reasons. And so much of it is actually it's up here. It's up in our brains and how we look at ourselves and how we look at other species and how we relate to each other. I lost my train of thought a little bit. So over to you. Someone else. I'm in between you two.
Back to Adrian.
Does that answer your question?
You mentioned places. There's a few places. Machu Picchu is a cool place to look at humanity, and Petra, and it puts you in perspective of but it's also, look at a mountain and realize how long it's been around for. And it makes all of that seem, as you said, like a speck of time. It's nothing. We're nothing. We're just dumb.
You answered my question, yes. Thank you, don't worry. I just wanted to follow up. Janna, I was really interested in the point you made kind of about how things might be left outside and animals roaming around. That imagery actually brought me back to the early days of the COVID pandemic. And I remember seeing information about how CO2 emissions were improving, but then I was also seeing pictures of mountain lions roaming around, like in Santiago de Chile, or even in the mountains of San Francisco. I was staying in the Bay Area during COVID, so that was kind of a big thing during that. So I was just wondering if you could maybe quickly expand on that, because I feel like we experienced that, a couple of years ago, yes.
And it happens very fast. Well, there's 2 points to make. One is that there is no single Earth ecosystem. It keeps changing. It will continue to change. Sometimes animals besides us have changed the ecosystem. The emergence of chlorophyll-based plants and that kind of vegetation completely changed the Earth's chemical composition and made it a place where we could inhabit. And it certainly wasn't like that before trees. So animals have changed, right, the earth fundamentally. We're not the only ones to do it. We're the only ones to be able to reverse course. That's really interesting. But if you ask about animals taking over, it's always made me marvel. Even if you look at Chernobyl, Chernobyl is absolutely overrun by vegetation and animals. And it happened very, very quickly, and they didn't foresee it because I thought the radiation was going to be so toxic or that the animals would start to die and they would have some instinct that it wasn't a safe place to nest, but actually quite the opposite happened. And it's really quite fascinating. Occasionally they'll let photographers in there and they'll take these shots of what's happening, and it's, you know, we sort of left behind this bizarre archaeological remnant that we can't occupy anymore. And that's kind of my visual for what I imagine this will all be like if we don't, you know, take care of ourselves. Again, the earth will survive. New species will come, new species that can tolerate the new chemical composition, that can handle the weather, that can handle everything that's happening. And it will be a perfectly fine place for that new generation of species.
I'm going to be Debbie Downer again. And I love that stuff. I love, like, you know, that whole series of Abandoned Nature, and it's like, yay, nature's taken back. And I totally agree with you. But I'm also like, you just have to wander upstairs and look at some of the creativity and look at what we've achieved, right? And like this is this thing, right? Like we achieve these incredible things. We've improved quality of life. There's like tons of problems for sure, but like as a species, we've done extraordinary things and we have the capacity. And for all the nice like deer coming out in the streets and looking back at the humans in their cages, you know, and you know, we're losing. Like we're losing massively. Like we're losing so quickly, it's frightening. And reports and reports and reports come out. And I'm telling you, like, you know, right now in Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh, they're meeting for COP27, right? We've put so much emphasis on this moment that's an annual thing now, right? 27 meetings, and think about what we're actually doing. If you break it all down, what we're all doing is sitting around in a room debating how much can I continue to pollute and for how long? That is it. It's not legally binding in any way, shape, or form. Don't believe the news, right? It's a process of acknowledgement that I'm polluting. That's all it does. And so while we've had 27 meetings to kind of figure it out, we've got COP15 starting in Montreal in early December, which is biological diversity. That's starting. Think about that. We've only had 15 meetings about the state of nature, but 27 meetings about climate. What is climate? Climate is now energy. Energy is now geopoliticized into energy, you know, security, right? It's about business. It's like, cool, we've got all this great, amazing energy, but what are we going to do with it? We've got all this clean energy, but if we've got no wild species, we've got no bees, we've got no, you know, biodiversity, we've got no trees, none of that energy means anything. Maybe more stuff, but we can't, like, just maybe AI and 3D print, you know, redwood. It's got, you know, this intelligence that we'll never be able to create. Not in our lifetime. Maybe we'll find a way. Maybe AI will find a way, and maybe there is some hope for that tool. But we're losing so rapidly everything that we rely on. You just take the phytoplankton in our ocean since the 1950s. We've lost 40% of the phytoplankton. Every second breath that you take comes from the ocean, and the reason why it comes from the ocean is phytoplankton, right? The other process of getting oxygen is trees, and guess what we do? We chop them down. So basically, everything that we breathe is, one, out of our control. We're losing it because the chemical composition of our oceans is hotter, and that has ramifications. It worked great for us on this oxygenation event, but we're now losing our ability. We're going to lose our ability to breathe from the ocean. So we might have abundance of energy, but what do we do when we've got no oxygen, right? You know, we all walk around in helmets, which is where we might be going because we're like in the metaverse or on a rocket somewhere else. But, you know, we look at things like Sharm el-Sheikh and we put so much emphasis on it. Today in America, you know, we're all voting again, you know, in this cycle, this crazy cycle. And there's still conversation like, who should we vote for, where, you know, and it's like we get distracted and everyone rips all these policies up on one side and the other, and we're just in this holding pattern while nature is being destroyed. And so we have to act as individuals. There should be nothing more important. There's that great, you know, Netflix show, Don't Look Up, but that film, whatever, like it was a bit of a shit movie, but the point was perfect. Sorry if anyone was involved in it, but it's true, right? It is, but it's exactly that thing. We don't respond unless our brain is fight or flight. If this building's on fire, we run out. If it's upstairs on fire, we might wait until the smoke, and they've done tests, the smoke alarm will go off and everyone will look at everyone else. We all look at each other until some of us start to leave, and when the majority leave and get up and go, we go, right? We look at each other for points of reference. So we need to look at each other as a community to make change. We cannot rely on short-term politicians who only have short-termism, who only care about 2-year cycles, to be in charge of long-term planning for our survival and that of the other species. That's just like illogical. The only time in modern history when we had an event that's affected all of us was COVID. It affected every single country, and there was, for one brief second, science-led policy. For one brief second. Then it got nationalized and commercialized, but for one brief second, it was the first time ever, and now I'm going to hand over to somebody who knows more than me. And that's what happened around the world. We were like, oh, okay, here's the health minister. And here's someone who's a scientist who actually knows what's going on, not somebody who's just trying to grab power. And they were like, this is the thing, we don't know a lot. And we all listened. Scientists have been for the last 25 years telling us verbatim exactly what is going to happen. And we're still bouncing around this concept that we're going to reach this magical 1.5 degree threshold. No way. We're going to hit 2.6, 100%. And that's if we're lucky. If we're lucky. We're getting to, I guarantee if we don't act within the next 2-3 years, like dramatically, wartime setting, 100 times what we just did for COVID. All of us should quit our jobs, and that's all we should be doing. We should only be focusing on this. If you want to have kids, you want to do things, you want to have freedoms, you want to breathe good air, you want to, you know what I mean? Like I know that tuna fish tastes awesome, and he probably deserves to be eaten because he tastes so good. Right? But we need that species. We've got to let it go, let it revive. We've got to give nature a break. Sorry, I'm just ranting, but like it's true. Yeah. Go on, Dustin.
No, next question, right?
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm just going to ask actually one more question before I turn it over to the audience. So since we are in a museum, I just thought it would be interesting to ask about like the intersections of art and science. I think that in my personal opinion, there isn't really a separation between ecology and climate change, and art is one lens to think about these realities. So I was going to present this question to all of you, but especially Dustin and Janna, because you both are so heavily involved at Pioneer Works, and I was wondering if you could speak about the intersections of art and science and how that's reflected in that site and like in your programming and whatnot.
Do you want to
lead?
Do you want to lead? So I don't know if people really understand. Dustin and I are part of this project that Dustin founded that we very organically have been building. And we sometimes say things like, we're building the world we want to live in because it didn't exist yet, right? And that was a lot of the feeling we had when we got started. And that our motto is that science is part of culture. We don't have to hide it. It belongs as a pillar alongside art and music and tech. But Dustin, I feel like, I don't know. Well, try it, baby.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I'll just more doves and starlings and formations of strange animals flying about. Science is part of culture, and that's a thing that you so aptly just said, that for the first time, people said, you know more. And I think there's a real problem on the earth that we don't listen and we don't say things like, I don't know. And we see that in governance so much. I mean, we were just talking back there, there's a minimum age to become president of this country, but there's no maximum. And look what we have. Look what's going on. what we're going to see in the next few months is a nightmare. And yet, we have no plan. There's nobody out there, is such a vacuum of leadership. And I'm off track, right? Science is part of culture, so science is part of culture. I mean, you know, like I was saying earlier, civilization is a sculpture. So this, you know, there's been so much over specialization in the academy that you know, up at certain said universities, you know, folks in the applied physics department are not talking to the theoretical physicists, right? You can't work. The music department and the film department don't talk to the architecture department. The arts, everybody has been separated. And those kind of narratives fucking suck. Excuse me. I didn't mean that, but it's true. I mean, my mother says don't say that word, so I apologize. But what I'm trying to say is that there is this, you know, think about the 16th century, right? You know, look at all that cool stuff, and look what we make now, right? What's going on? So I think, you know, I don't know where I'm trying to answer your question here, but I think that culture is the thing that if we can get culture to work, then we have a chance to live in harmony with nature. And if we don't get culture to work, you know, it's bye-bye birdie. We're gone. And it's going to happen soon. And 1.5 billion people, a correction of 1.5 billion people on this planet, or 2 billion people on this planet, is pretty frightening. And you think about the bomb, which we've been thinking about for decades. Well, think about CRISPR. Think about the idea that you can make a virus in a garage for less than a used car and take out half the species. And now think about the mental health of humanity right now. Think about what we see happening in our schools right now, and extrapolate that out into a garage and a virus that takes out half of the species. That's where we're headed if everybody, as David said, if there's not a wartime effort for change. And that's going to take the scientists, that's going to take the artists, that's going to take everyone. And that's going to take us to stop drawing these lines between us. I mean, just the idea of China and the United States is such bullshit. Who came up with that? I mean, really, no, that is some invented bullshit. Who came up with that? Anyways, did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. And
I can give, sorry, Adrianne, I can give like a more pedestrian response to this. Like, here we are at MoCA, and we're talking about these topics. So we do a lot at Pioneer Works of bringing in very serious scientists to talk hardcore about science. And they're unfiltered, they're not dumbing it down. And we are always trying to get to the point where the scientists themselves don't know the answer. Because I really think that that's very important for people to understand. Scientists, I had a very biased and silly stereotyped idea of a scientist when I was a kid. I never imagined I would become a scientist in a million years, but I thought they memorized things and simply had this collection of facts that were then distributed. But clearly that's completely false, and I want to show people the thought processes and when scientists become out of their depth and are grasping for answers, because that's the most exciting time to be alive as a scientist, is when you have the questions and not the answers. And it fits in very naturally with an art center. We never say when an artist exhibits their work that they're doing outreach or public understanding of art, right? But we have this sort of strange attitude towards scientists when they come out of the lab and start to communicate culturally, which I think we're in a time where science is a very important part of how we think, how we make decisions, how we understand the world, how we vote, and and carving sort of the next era culturally, for sure.
I would agree. I'll keep it short, I promise. But I think that, you know, for me, I mean, as an environmentalist, I've failed because I've failed to connect the science to stories. And I think that's the stories. Science will inform us, and stories can save us. And that's the way that I look at it. And so when you sit inside a place like this, what the stories here do is they elicit a response. And the science alone isn't eliciting a response. That's really clear. I hate to say it. Scientists say the most beautiful things. They hypothesize. It's in their nature to be, you know, sparring, right? You should never reach the end of the road. But at some point, you've got to anchor it in stories that open our hearts and not just leave us in our minds. And so finding that cross between science and stories is the essential essence of what you guys, I perceive, to be creating. And what is why it's important to have these conversations in places like this, because we respond to awe and wonder. That's just, as a species, we respond to that emotion. And I think we do that not through science, not through data. That's the mistake. As an environmentalist, I'm an undertaker for the wilderness, and all I tell you is statistics about what's lost and potentially maybe what's possible. But I can only hit you in the place that you're going to do something if it's done through the medium of creativity and culture and storytelling. So.
Well, thank you all for answering my questions. I appreciate how open-ended this conversation has gone. I really do. It's been fun. So we're going to turn it over to audience questions right now. And so how about...
There's a couple of things I was curious about. So sometimes in this like narrative of the state we are in, we're maybe talking to, you know, first world people living a certain, you know, type of wealth and consumerism, and obviously the countries that are creating more of the ecological disasters and less wealthy nations are the ones like dealing with the effects right now. I guess the question is, okay, relating to that is also in, you know, there's the science that communicates truth. I guess like my question is about also, you know, indigenous wisdoms, right? Indigenous peoples, like of North America, for instance, are humankin that have been able to survive in a balanced relationship as nature with nature for tens of thousands or longer years. So I'm curious about, maybe, do you interact, do you kind of work with indigenous peoples and their kind of like ancient wisdom as well? So I guess that's just poking a little bit at the we narrative. Maybe you could, you know, talk about.
I mean, I'll just say that I've definitely spent a lot of time visiting in indigenous groups around the world and participating in their ceremonies.
So to answer your question, yes. Yeah, you know. Thanks, Dustin. Sweet. You know, for the work that I do, it's impossible to do it without consulting an indigenous worldview. And so, you know, for me, it's like looking at the center point of who are the original custodians with the unbroken lineage to nature. And so when you look at any, you know, Western developed concept of nature, it's a commodity. That's it, right? It's this thing that it's taking from. It's something that's fully just consumptive. Whereas the other position that is the true position is working in partnership, something greater than. And so our view in the West is that we dominate nature predominantly because of modern religion and many other things. But we predominantly look at it as something that we control, and it's our right to control. Whereas obviously an indigenous worldview is the opposite end of that, which makes them the great custodians, which gives them the platform and the wisdom that we should be listening to find the solutions, to look at the land management uses and the cases like The science is clear. Every time you look at indigenous wisdom applied to conservation, it succeeds. Every time you look at our view of, let's decide in a room of planting tons of trees, which we know would take, 600 million hectares, which is impossible and would still not save us, we ruin it because that's our view of like, well, we know what to do, we'll just plant lots of trees, rather than looking at the whole and the system. And so you have to look at the entire system. You have to look at, that's how nature cooperates and works, and that's why the indigenous worldview understands that. And so, yes, this is a very Western point of view sitting in here talking about it, and I think there is, the sadness is that, we marginalize and have continually marginalized that point of view because we're afraid to unlearn. And we have this very dominant, Western view that we know better, and those people over there, they don't know better. And I see it the whole time in policy. I see it when I'm sitting, doing stuff with the UN, and I see that, and I'm like, why is nobody at the table with us who has real knowledge that's on the ground? The people closest to the problem know how to solve the problem. That's it. And they know it because they listen to nature and they look at it as something bigger than themselves, not something that they're outside of the web of life and can just consume. And so, yes, I do that. We have if you want to check out United Nations of Nature, it's a platform that we've been building to do exactly this, looking at the rights of nature, which is grounded fully in an indigenous worldview.
I don't know, Terry's looking at me, so I'm going to make something up. I just, I do think I'm very much a believer that we haven't inherited a kind of code from the universe. That is why we are able to understand the universe. That is why we have mathematics. Every civilization that we know of quantifies, has a kind of math. Ancient civilizations invented things like zero. I mean, deep, profound, really meaningful concepts, and I guess I'm very much a believer that we inherit it from the cosmos, and then we use it to reflect on the cosmos. And so I usually like to say things like I'm only interested in stuff that happened longer than 1 billion years ago. That's pretty much my sweet spot, about 1 billion years ago. And yet, 1 billion years ago, we weren't here, right? Multicellular organisms were just differentiating on the Earth. And to think that a lot of the light that we receive from the universe was emitted in our direction before we were even here, I just find that there is this kind of natural integration of where we are in the universe, where we are as reflectors on the cosmos and inheritors of that code.
Maybe we're just already in the metaverse.
Yeah, well.
And this is it. It's become so great that now we're evolving the next one, and that line will get blurred in the next 50, 100, 200 years, and we'll be having a parallel conversation.
Yeah, well, somewhere else in the universe, creatures, sentient, not sentient, are looking in our direction, and we weren't here yet, right? So they're looking at our galaxy when there was a quasar at the center of our galaxy and a big black hole, and all of this that we're living out, these signals will take a very long time to reach it to any other exoplanetary system and tell our story.
Hi. This has been an extremely profound conversations. I think about this stuff all the time. So you guys have so articulately said so many things that I'm like, how do we say this? So the things that I feel like are our biggest hurdles, and I'll make this super quick, is we clearly lack empathy. We're a highly narcissistic culture. Politics get in the way. To sort of hit on your point, it's probably easier to control people and the fear of people than it is to control the fear of the world crumbling around us. And then also capitalism, and there's oppressive societies and oppressive governments, and it kind of hits on the poor that you mentioned also just up in the conversation up here. And so I work in the nasty business of advertising. So you guys talk about storytelling, and what I'm kind of curious to understand in sort of all the things I touched on is not really what I'm interested in, but if the stories can't be told through science, but also we see things like Pakistan completely drowning, and that's affecting millions of people. We see the rainforest in Brazil, rainforest burning. We see the Great Barrier Reef turning white and dying around us. I guess you know, from my perspective, and like, how can I help and how can I tell these stories? Because that's what I'm rooted in all the time. Like, what is this war? What is the thing that's going to snap? And if anybody's predicted, like, what is going to be that big monumental moment that actually stirs us to have to tell these stories or have to speak out? Like, what is it if it's not those three things I mentioned? Because they seem, you know, massive in my opinion, and they get brushed over by all the reasons I stated up at the beginning.
I mean, I'm worried that it's going to have to be something very, very, very dark.
I will say that to speak on behalf of our species, that there are subcultures that are not driven by the themes that you mentioned. So if you look at something like the James Webb Space Telescope and the incredible ingenuity that went into that, the PI on that project, John Mather, already had a Nobel Prize for a different project. And he spent 25 years as the principal investigator on making the James Webb Space Telescope. Has everyone heard of that, I assume, because it's all over the place? And it was 14 years late and tremendously over budget, but it is the most complicated instrument ever built. And they put this beautiful, fragile thing on an explosive device, launched it into space, right, where it unfurled over the course of a month, got to a heliocentric orbit, where it's sending us back these images. All of that is a testament to what we can do when we have a different philosophy and frame of mind. That was an international collaboration. Nobody got rich. The data belongs to everybody. I mean, it's exactly antithetical to everything you just described, which we take for granted as our government, our culture, the way it has to be, right? And it really isn't the way it has to be. And that's when I have hope for us, is when I think if we applied a fraction of that fortitude to this problem, it would be solved. I'm certain of it.
I think the thing that I take from what you were trying to say is just like, you know, those three monumental things, like, you know, flooding, bleaching, deforestation, right? Just as wherever it's happening in the world, right? Fires, it's happening constantly, right? Is because we remove ourselves, or there's this false dichotomy that there's nature and us, we don't think that that's actually connected to us. So the polar region feels super far away and not connected to me, as much as like my brain tries to rationalize it. It goes, okay, there's an ice sheet that could melt, that could 7 meters rise. Wow, okay. And then my brain goes into sort of this survival mode that just blocks it out and takes it away from me somehow. It moves it and goes, somebody else is figuring that out. I'm sure scientists is figuring it out, or someone, right? It's back to don't look up. So because we don't have that relationship with ourselves, that we think we're part of nature, it's very hard for us to comprehend those things that we think about it as someone else's problem. The polar bear, well, he can swim, can't he? That's ice, but he'll eat me, it's over there. So those aren't triggers, right? Triggers for us are very primal, and they are, someone runs in the room with a knife, we tackle it, him, her, or we run, flight and fight. So we do things that are right in front of us. And that is the problem with the storytelling piece, is a lot of those stories are told as abstract places in faraway, you know, systems. It might as well be the galaxy, right? I spent 110 days trying to ski from Russia all the way over to Canada, right? I came back, I was like, whoa, you know, and then I started talking about it, and I was like, feels like somewhere complete. I couldn't even relate to it again. When I was even talking, I was like, you're a fraud, you weren't there, that just feels weird. But I lived on that ocean, and I still feel weird talking about it, like it's another world, and that is our relationship to nature. So it's you know, the advertising piece that I would say that is just like the thing that we could do the quickest, and I've said this before on a stage actually with you, and it's had some momentum. If you're in advertising, it's like create an endowment for nature. Literally, you know, if Brad Pitt sits on a campaign, he gets paid $20 million. But if you take a snow leopard for Cartier, which is in almost every one of their adverts, we don't pay the snow leopards anything. Every single advert you look at has nature in it, whether it's someone using a rhino for a truck, or someone using wolves to promote their hotel, or some soda drink that says, look at this pristine lake, it's just like my soda. Like every advertising, we spend $560 billion a year on advertising, of which a good couple $100 million are exploiting nature. So just let's pay a royalty to nature. So next time your client is sitting there using an image of nature, Maybe pay a royalty back to protect that species or that fund. That's a quick thing you can do. Because we need funding. That's the bottom line. Like, the environmental movement gets less money than the arts. 5% of all giving in the United States goes to arts and media and culture. 100%, I'm super down for that. But there is no museum without air. There is no museum without forests. There is no museum. You can't do any of this without nature. You just can't. 4% of funding out of 420 billion every year in the United States alone, most progressive giving market, only 4% goes to the environment, 11 billion. That's it. Sounds a lot, but it's not a lot. Sustainable development goals, we need trillions of dollars, and we're not even making 1 trillion a year going towards it. So when you read these things, you're like, oh, sustainable development goals, great, yeah. We're not doing it. We're just not. Yeah.
So it looks like we have time for about 2 more questions.
Hello. Hi, good evening. I'm Angelo from Farmfluence, and first of all, the work that the 3 of you have done is a constant inspiration for myself and my team. Now that all 3 of you are here, real talk. What are you working on today, and how much of it is inspired by your optimism or pessimism of the future? Because I'm sure the 3 of you have seen things and know things that the common man doesn't have access to. So much research I've done. I've been following your work. So are you optimistic about the future, pessimistic, and that's reflected in your work? And I'd love to hear more.
I think that those things exist simultaneously. So our capacity for optimism and our capacity for pessimism, or our capacity to love, or our capacity to fear, or suffering versus joy. I think both those things, like past and future, exist simultaneously. So it's really in one's ability to access that dynamic. And if you can feel both of them simultaneously, then perhaps you can execute on whatever it is that you're trying to dream up.
Nailed it again.
So
hard to follow.
Yeah. Oh, we can bounce back and forth. So if you're asking what we're really working on, I really am working on, I think a lot about black holes, a lot, and also have been doing some work on the possibility that our universe isn't three-dimensional, but has a larger number of spatial dimensions. You know, important things like that. And yeah, why not? So that I also have a strange simultaneity of pessimism and optimism. Like, I like dark stories. I like dystopian stories. I love a good apocalyptic, tale, right? But I also have a great deal of kind of childlike, I think, optimism that a lot of scientists just have. Because there's this sort of sense of looking at the world as a wondrous place, marveling at the world all the time. A species that can do that. We can't be all bad, right? And so, yeah, I think it's this constant interplay between those two states.
Agree. I think for me, the work is just keep on doing what we've been doing for a long time. I'm particularly interested in the area of mental health and access to nature. Access to nature is not equitable, it's not fair, it's predominantly a white male sport, hobby for affluent people. Mental health is a crisis that is out of control everywhere. Suicides are out of control. We're living in this age of, I think it was Roosevelt said, comparison is the thief of joy, and we're stealing joy from ourselves every day, and that creates a huge amount of mental strife. We saw it through COVID. So for me, I'm interested in using nature as the remedy. How do we rewild ourselves? How do we start to look at inner cities? We know that access to nature brings crime down. We know that getting kids and adults alike, changes the mental topography that then has an impact on, the nature around us. And so that's a huge area. Looking at these climate conversations, the big mission anyway for me is to bring nature into the narrative. I'm trying to work heavily with the government in UAE next year to try and bring a nature zone to the climate conversations, right? We have a blue zone, green zone, everyone's sitting there talking about climate. And in Montreal, so Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt is all about climate. And then over in Montreal, we're going to talk about nature. But there is no climate without nature. So why are we not having that conversation together? Let's just start there and have an honest conversation about bringing nature into the mix. And so I think it's beating that nature drum, and just have to be optimistic, even though it's the road ahead is really daunting, and there's a lot of times you just want to quit and go, fuck it, we're out, peace, But then I read up on projects that you're doing and hear people doing cool things, and I see amazing projects the whole time and get inspired just to be in rooms where you can engage with people and find that clean energy that we're actually looking for, which is human ingenuity and human capacity to achieve. And we have that capacity. It's just we leave it in the hands of very inept, incapable people to manage our future.
Good evening. Thank you all for being here. Question about telling stories through imagination and that being a vehicle to help policymakers that may be short-sighted to think beyond themselves or even beyond solving something in their lifetime is the idea of planting an acorn for an oak tree you'll never feel the shade of, right? Specifically, what have been some works of art, whether they're film, book, whatever, that you all get to use as reference points? So for example, Janna being able to explore black holes but explain it through a scene in Interstellar, right? Or Gene Roddenberry's idea of, Star Trek and the United Federation of Planets and things of that nature. Things like that are very important and impactful for helping people wrap their mind around complex things. Even, Dustin's work here with the tanker, putting it in perspective of context. What have been some of yours individually, what have been some of your ready-to-go, go-to references to help people wrap their mind around things, to show the importance of storytelling and art and helping imagine a different future?
Well, I write a lot, and I really feel it is, when I'm writing, an art form, I hope. I am striving for that. And I've been very influenced by a lot of books that have scientific themes. One of our series we call Science versus Fiction. It's not science fiction specifically. We had Marlon James, who's a very famous American novelist, who was thinking about tree roots in his trilogy that he's been writing, like Moon Witch, Spider King. And a lot of novelists and playwrights really reflect on science in a very powerful way. Tom Stoppard's Arcadia, Carol Churchill's play A Number, where the single most important character in the play, you realize, has not only been cloned, but he's not actually the original. There's Never Let Me Go by Ishiguro, who's Nobel Prize-winning novelist, also wrote about cloning in Never Let Me Go. It's crushingly beautiful. Martin Amos's book, Time's Arrow, runs backwards. So there's a lot out there that is really unbelievable. There are unbelievable literary works where science is the fodder. And so I think that these stories have been so influential, even in the way that you're describing. A lot of times when we can't find the words, there is some imagined history that captures all of the emotional resonance that we're looking for, and points to some kind of inspiration for solutions as well. So I definitely find a lot of it in books.
I would just say the biggest reflection of the work that I'm doing just comes straight back from nature. 20 years ago when I started, doing work and talking about, you know, a changing climate. You were just that hippie weirdo on the outside. And I was like, yeah, whatever, bro. Go get the weed, go get some shrooms. Like, yeah, that's cool. I love that. But, you know, it was always something out there. It was something just for the realm of science papers and something peer-reviewed journals. And in a way, tragically, my work's become easier. Just turn on your app. Turn on any news app right now. And whether it's Pakistan or whether it's Portugal or whether it's, you know, there are just a litany of examples. And so then underneath that, I think it's actually more around getting back into that prefrontal cortex and predictability of the future and saying, okay, how do we actually move on from this very static moment, which we've been in for a while, which is just describing the problem. That's the biggest issue we face right now, is that we're really good. Every news story is like, there's another fire. It's like, cool. So why don't we do the news story that follows up that says, and this is how we solve it, right? Stop monoplanting, right? Eucalyptus in a place that is not endemic and they go up in flames, they're self-sacrificial, that's gonna create fire. So there is a way, I think for me as now it's creative storytelling on possibility that is a bigger need. So that's a big thing for me, is like nature's telling the best, as the best reference book. Sadly.
More dovetails. Anybody here seen a total solar eclipse? I highly counsel you all on April 8th, 2024, to get into the path of totality. But with that, it's the infinite is everywhere. So there are so many books and trees and films that it's endless if you're curious, right? It's like, has anybody here seen The Color of Pomegranates? All right, we got one. Anybody here like Tarkovsky's pictures? We got a few. The point is, if you're curious, it's endless. It's truly, truly endless. You know what drives me crazy? When people say, I'm bored. I want to kill them. Is that wrong? Does that answer your question?
With that being said, I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight and for listening to the conversation, participating in the conversation, asking great questions. I would like to thank Dustin again for organizing this, and for Dustin, David, and Janna for participating. Thank you all so much.